So today's speaker is Katie Slivovsky. She's the Exhibit Development Director at the Chicago Children's Museum. She's a Bachelor's of Science from Iowa State in Wildlife Biology and has worked as a nature educator at the Brookfield Zoo and the Morton Arboretum. Over the last 20 years, she's lectured across the country and in China about issues related to children and childhood. She had a piece in Newsweek a decade ago called "Save the Elephants, Don't Buy Ivory Soap." She has also been... It's funny, right? Got it? She's been published in Chicago Parent and Illinois Steward, and has been on the radio and TV about exhibits that she's created for children and families at the Children's Museum and the Brookfield Zoo, including the award-winning Hamill Family Play Zoo. And I'm excited to hear today. She's going to talk to us about this. I'm a helicopter parent. I'm not a helicopter parent. I'm a helipad. And I want to welcome Katie up here. Thanks. Make sure I don't take your papers.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Is Mike here? Oh, hi. We spoke on the phone, and he, mentioned this event and invited me to speak, and I said, "You had me at Ethical Humanists." What a great community. I'm so excited, and if I lived closer, I think I would be here more often. So as Katie mentioned, I am here today to share with you a particular point of view. And it is based on 20 years of parenting. I stand before you as the world's leading expert in my own parenting mistakes. I have worked for 25 years in various aspects of childhood or child development. And then also, you heard the wildlife biology thing. I have studied ecology and evolution, and that has kind of influenced my point of view as well, which we will see in a minute. And then I sort of have this ongoing interest in how our attitudes and perceptions have changed over time when it comes to safety and risk. So we'll look at that. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to start by reading this essay. So this whole thing started just a couple of months ago when I coined a term, wrote an essay about it, submitted it to a national blog. It got posted, it got commented on. I ended up on WBEZ and WGN radio, and this is all in the last couple of months. So I figured I should start by actually sharing the essay with you. Then I'm going to tell you why I wrote it. I will offer some extended explanations. I will share what influenced it, and then we'll wrap up by really zeroing in on safety. Then I know there will be another musical interlude, and then we'll have a question and answer period, and I really look forward to that. So please, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, take notes, think of things you want to talk about during that Q&A, because that will be really great. I love a good debate, so bring it on. Okay, so here is the essay, and you do have a version of it in your bulletin today. I'm going to read you a slightly longer version, but what you'll have will be a nice piece to refer to later if you're interested. All right, here we go. If the term helicopter parent describes people who hover over their children's lives, what kind of parent am I? I don't have the skills, attention span, or desire to hover over my children, but I know I'm not a detached, lazy, or disinterested parent. So I was thinking about this, and I had a thought. I may be a crappy helicopter, but I make a decent helipad. I empower my kids to take charge of their daily lives, and I provide a safe place to land, a helipad, in times of trouble. So I'll admit it. True confessions, I have never once checked my children's homework, ever. My sister teaches 3rd grade, and early on she advised that it was my job to create the time and the place, and it was my children's job to do the work. I don't even know to this day how to access the portal thing that the high school sends me. My kids just show me their grades at dinner, and we talk about what's working and what's not. I believe my children deserve the credit and the blame for their grades. I don't. This really goes for most of the choices that they make each day. This may sound kind of hands-off, but I'm actually really intentional about my parenting choices. So what I want to do is support and encourage my children, but not lead them. That's because, number one, they know much more about being a teenager in 2015 than I do. I know all about 1980, though. And number two, when they make their own choices and mistakes, they feel empowered and more adventurous. And we're all exposed to new things. For example, I don't give two hoots about high school wrestling, and I certainly did not suggest it to my son, but it turned out to be great. I never missed a meet. I ended up being quite fascinated by the whole spectacle, smelly gym and all. And I, a nature-loving museum educator, would sit in the front row and literally shout, "Get him, Eric, get him!" So loud that the poor kid had to ask me to stop using his name. True. So, while I avoid leading my children, I do try to lead my own life in a way that benefits others and ultimately them. I know from watching my own parents that actions speak louder than words. I rarely say much about the volunteer work I do. The kids know about it because I'm not home on a Wednesday night, or I'm hosting a meeting at the house, or there's some newsletter on the refrigerator. So, and I wonder if, maybe I actually have more time to lead my own life because I'm not trying to lead theirs. So a lot of my parenting efforts from the beginning were intended to provide my children with the healthiest teenage years possible. I knew the time would come when they would drive, say yes or no to drugs, and I would be nowhere in sight, right? So I wanted them to feel empowered to make good choices, but more than anything, return to me for safe landing when bad things happened. So I have made some mistakes, some doozies. One of the biggest of all time was completely missing the fact that my then 12-year-old daughter had developed type 1 diabetes. She was losing weight and drinking ridiculous amounts of water for weeks and weeks. Another parent might have Googled those symptoms right away and discovered the cause. I literally told her to eat more ice cream and carry a water bottle. Not great. I really deeply regret that slow response, but at the same time, I don't really beat myself up over it continually. I kind of accept this mistake because it's related to the type of parent that I am, and I can't help but be. This might be another quality of Helipad parents. We're not so shocked when we screw up, nor are we paralyzed by our mistakes. Perfection was never the goal. I expected to make a few big blunders along the way, and I expect my children will too. So today, our family tackles diabetes as a team. My daughter Leah makes the daily decisions. My husband refills the prescriptions, and I do the doctor appointments and research. Okay, I'm okay, you're okay, right? I do not believe that one parenting approach is better or worse than another. They both have good and bad qualities, but this is the thing, and you asked me earlier why I wrote this. I do feel the Helipad parent is underrepresented in magazines and the parenting blogs, and I think some Helipad parents might even feel guilty because they don't hover, but maybe it's because they can't. And I think there's something to be said for the calm, slow to respond Helipad. At the moment my daughter was diagnosed with diabetes in the doctor's office, I was able to remain supportive and steady. Meanwhile, my husband, bless his heart, fainted on the spot. For whatever reason, I'm just not easily shocked. My kids know they can come to me with anything. I'm going to listen, hear them out, not react really quickly, and I believe that there's safety in that. So here it is. We might be able to sort of tweak our tendencies and think about when it's best to zoom in like a helicopter or back off like a helipad, but at the end of the day, we are who we are, and as long as we're trying, definitely trying, I believe it's a waste of precious parental energy to feel guilty about our flaws. So let's embrace the parenting style that comes most naturally to us, because that's when we're at the most authentic and our children get the best from us. So that concludes the essay. And so now what I'd like to do is share with you sort of what led me to this, why I decided to write this. So, a little bit more. I needed a word. How many of you have heard of helicopter parent? Is that just a term you're familiar with? So we all kind of know of that term, and I just knew that it wasn't me. But I didn't want to just not be something. But it was difficult to put into words what I actually was, right? Sort of like for you guys, it's like you don't want to just be, or for me personally, I don't want to just be a non-believer. I want to be something. I want to be an ethical humanist. I want to be a helipad parent. So this is kind of the interesting thing. So picture, I don't know if you know where Western Springs, Illinois is. It's about half hour south of here, raising my kids, little neighborhood, and to my neighbors, I seemed like the least protective parent on the block because of this. I let my children out of my sight. I let them climb trees, and I talked to them about things like sex. To me, though, I felt like the most protective parent because I was one of the few who limited screen time. I did not let my young children watch PG-13 or R-rated movies, and I didn't allow much junk food. So it's sort of how do you define protective? So why did I feel kind of reckless? And I thought, well, when parents talked about why they wouldn't let their kids walk to school, I couldn't really easily explain why I did. I wanted a term or something, or I wish I had then, a term that sort of sounded just as valid as what they were doing. So, noodling on this, helipad is the word. So last fall, I was driving my son back to college, and we got to talking about parenting. And I was saying this whole little thing about that, I don't take the credit or the blame. And he kind of thought I was, saying something negative about myself. So I was like, all right, that's not working either. I need a way to describe all that I actually had been doing, something that sounded more intentional. And so I really was noodling on that. I was puzzling about it. And I finally started to think to myself, it's going to sound so simple, right? But I was thinking, what's the opposite of a helicopter? And that's when that concept of helipad just clicked. And really it was an aha moment. So next, I knew I was onto something when I started trying out the word on my coworkers. And some of the people I was sort of explaining this to and chatting with, I literally saw relief wash across their face. And that's what's kept me going. There is a group of people out there, maybe some of you, who believe they are good parents, who are doing their best, and actually feel comfortable with their parenting choices, but have trouble explaining it to others, especially the hoverers. So I mentioned that this essay was posted on a national blog, and I want to share with you 3 comments that were written about it, because it just kind of lets you know how it's resonating with people. So the first one was, thanks for putting what I have tried to do since my children were born into words. Great. This one I really love. Second comment was, I love the sense of companionship and shared reality that I get from reading this piece. And then the third comment really speaks to that sort of spectrum of parenting that I fully embrace. So she says, I love that Katie is putting the spotlight on being authentic and letting go of the guilt. My helicopter mom friends may not be my first choice for play dates, but they are loving, engaged parents. When I remember not to get defensive about letting my kids be free range, I get to enjoy the full spectrum of successful parenting. So then I mentioned BEZ, WGN, Chicago Parent. There's an article coming out in Chicago Parent, like right this week, I believe. And then actually it was Mike that heard me speaking on WBEZ and called me up and invited me here. So there's just a lot of momentum and excitement about this idea. All right. So what I'd like to do next is offer a couple of extended explanations and examples. So if you have not figured out yet, my family's sitting right here in the front row. My two kids, now Eric is 20, so he's no longer a teenager, and then Leah is 16. My husband, bless him, he did faint, but he recovered. And then my mother. So see, they're keeping me honest, right? I'm not making this up. All right, so when Eric was in maybe 5th or 6th grade, he asked me, are we Democrats or Republicans? I don't know if your kids ever asked you that and how you answered it, but I remember thinking, well, I totally know what I am, and someday you will tell me what you are. Then I proceeded to tell him all my beliefs and opinions, very opinionated. I got him, right? But then I also encouraged him to talk to people that I knew had the opposite beliefs, maybe even polar opposite, like maybe my father-in-law, for example. Because I really wanted him to get the full spectrum of how to think about these things. Another example is I always used gender-neutral terms when referring to my children's crushes and love interests. So I never asked my daughter, what boy are you going to take to the dance? I would say, who are you taking to the dance? Or my son, in the future, do you think you might have a partner someday and have kids or whatever? I'm interested, but I'm using gender neutral terms so that, again, one day they could tell me if they were gay, straight, bisexual, whatever. So I just bring these two things up because I think they represent my feelings that I believe my children are their own people, and I don't need to control them. I don't need to tell them what to think, but I definitely encourage them to think things through and come up with their own conclusions and be independent thinkers. So thinking is important, but it's up to you to think it through. Okay, so now a little bit about influences. They want to know about my childhood. Was I a free-range kid? And I would say I thought I was. I grew up in a small town, and I played in the woods and the creek and the field behind my house. I felt very autonomous, so I was a little surprised to learn just in the last couple of months that my mother considered herself to be part copter, which is actually kind of a perfect thing, right? So she thought she was hovering, and I didn't feel hovered over. Great, whatever works. I mentioned my sister as well. So I was able to watch her raise her children who are 5 or 6 years older than mine. That's always helpful. Makes you feel confident in your decisions, right? And then the fact that she was a teacher, I knew that a lot of the advice she gave me came from such a place of experience that, again, I didn't feel like this was just a whim I was going on. But let me tell you that what I think is really the most important thing that sort of influences this philosophy, and that is just my personality. I don't really work at this. It's not hard for me. I don't get a lot of credit or blame for this. This is just kind of how I am, the whole slow to respond and kind of steady and listening and all of that. If anything, working on this project and writing gave me empathy for the helicopter parent, because I feel if you're kind of wired to hover over your kids, that might be something that's just innate in you as well. So again, not pointing fingers. And here's another thing. Have you ever heard, let's say you have 3 kids and each kid needs a different type of parent? I really kind of argue that point because I'm thinking, sure I can tweak my tendencies, but I am one human being. I cannot be 3 different types of mothers. So there are going to be times in my child's lives when I'm probably a little bit better suited than others, and I just sort of have to accept that. I'm not a chameleon. I can't adapt to that level. So just something to keep in mind. And I think that's another thing that it makes you feel guilty. Well, you're not being the perfect parent for each child. Well, you are who you are, and being an authentic person should be enough. Okay, still on sort of influences, I want to move into my professional life a little bit. So because of the places that I've worked over the years, I've learned a lot about what's developmentally appropriate for kids, particularly at Brookfield Zoo and at the Chicago Children's Museum, where I am surrounded by professional early learning specialists. And I feel it is respectful to understand what children are capable of and to not shelter them and not to make them feel responsible for adult problems. Now, that's a little thing we'll circle back to in a few minutes. So another influence is I just have an affinity for teenagers. I mentioned that I was really geared toward giving my kids the healthiest teen years possible, partly because I know they're super challenging, but also I just have this soft spot for teenagers, and I have a lot of experience working with teenagers. I actually started at the Indianapolis Children's Museum, and I ran a teen volunteer program there for 4 years. Many years later, I was at the Morton Arboretum, and I started a teen volunteer program there that is now in its 10th year. And what I believe about teenagers is that they need boundaries with wiggle room, right? If the boundaries are too close, they're just going to be breaking through them, and that's not great for anyone. But if the boundaries are out here, and here's the confession, you kind of, they're going to break them a little bit, right? Or bend them a little bit. You just don't want them to not have any idea where the boundaries are or have them so close. So that's a tricky thing. And then the second thing that I've learned about working with teenagers is, how do you get a teenager's attention? By nature, they are not really cued to listening to their parents very closely from maybe age 15 to 18. They should be looking at other adults for guidance, and that's natural and normal. But if you want their attention on certain things, for me, I chose to limit it to 3 main topics. And that was unprotected sex, drinking and driving, and addictive drugs and smoking because of the addiction quality. So those are the 3 things that I focused on. If I had made it seem like every little thing was dangerous, I feel like I couldn't have had their attention on the things that I truly believed to be dangerous. So it kind of has to do with not diluting the message. Okay, so we talked about influences. I mentioned my childhood, my family, my personality, my job, and my affinity for teenagers. So what I want to do next is sort of zero in on the risk and safety stuff. So as I mentioned, I was a student of ecology and evolution. And think about this. When is it okay to disregard what your gut tells you to fear? So I'd like to read something from this awesome book. I recommend this, a PhD biologist, Glenn Cruston, and it's called The Real Story of Risk. Yes, I left it out in the rain. Long story, won't go into it. But here, so let me share with you from this book. He talks about this. And when I use the word predator here, I'm talking lions and tigers, not humans. He says, we retain a deep-rooted fear of predators that media and movies exploit to the fullest of their abilities. Think Jaws, think Snakes on a Plane. But Hollywood did not invent this fear. It was already there long before the movies were around to capitalize on it. When you today are walking through a dark wooded area at night, or more likely for us, a darkened city street, feeling on edge and surrounded by shadows, it's the echo of a past age is still with us, looking for predators that might leap out at any moment. After all, we have evolved for millions of years, being hunted and eaten by other animals. But we have only had to fear automobile accidents for 100 years, just a few generations. So tigers, bears, and wolves touch off much deeper neural pathways than Toyotas, Fords, or Volkswagens. These days, most people in the developed world don't meet a panther or a leopard outside of a zoo, but if we ever do, we're ready. Far down in our mind, we are still waiting for one to leap out of a tree. So, we are more afraid of bears than we are of texting and driving. So he goes on to say that even these very parents that are afraid to let their children climb a tree might be texting and driving. So it's a tricky, tricky thing. Little statistic for you, about 6,700 people die in the United States each day, 6,700 every day, 2,000 from heart disease, 120 in car accidents. How many by bear attack? 0. The number is so negligible statistically, it is 0, yet we're more afraid of that. So we are wired to fear certain things that in some cases are no longer relevant. That's why I bring this up. So when is it okay to disregard your fears? Let me give you an example. So we move to a new house. I walk out into the backyard and I see my daughter 15 feet up in a tree. I had a negative feeling about that. That sounded so academic. I had a negative feeling. I had this really awful gut reaction. Get out now, right? But I just took a breath, thought it through, and thought she's 9 years old. She's 15 feet up in a tree. She is smiling and waving and feeling so proud and excited. And I knew that the benefits to her were, in my mind, greater than the risk of serious injury. She might have fallen out of the tree. She might have actually even broken an arm. But even if she had done those things, we would have gotten a cast. 6 weeks later, it would be off. Now, see, 1,000 years ago, a parent who probably didn't live past 25 anyway would want that kid to come out of that tree because a fall would mean death. So again, just kind of thinking through those innate gut reactions of what makes sense to apply in our world today. Okay, so still speaking of childhood, I want to talk a little bit about my work at the Chicago Children's Museum, where I work now. And in my job, I get to think a lot about childhood and how it has changed over the years. So we know that kids today are over-tested. You might have seen images of kids wrapped in bubble wrap, overprotected, and removed from the physical world more than ever. Not that that's all bad, but they just don't have three-dimensional experiences in the world as much as they used to. So fundamentally, childhood may have changed, but children themselves have not changed that much. What do children across time, culture, and gender need, want, and love to do? Those are the same things. Those are testing their limits, building forts, creating their own special places, challenging themselves, taking risks, still what children need to do today, which is why last summer at the museum, we actually created an experience called the Human Wrecking Ball. And we invited kids to get up on this platform that was about 6 feet high and leap off onto a rope and swing into a pile of beanbag chairs and sort of crash land onto a big pad. So we had some signage around there for the adults so they wouldn't think we were crazy. And the headline on the sign said, "Danger done right." And this is the language. It said, "Children build confidence when they size up a challenge, try something new, face their fears." And then it had a little quote that said, "What's really dangerous? When children don't test their limits or learn to trust their own decisions." We have another experience at the Children's Museum called the Tinkering Lab. And in that space, we have hand saws, hammers, nails, screwdrivers, screws. And children are shown how to use these tools, but they're not shown what to do. They create whatever they want in there. They tinker. So you might think, okay, how safe is that? And I like to say it's ice pack safe. We give out Band-Aids, ice packs, and antiseptic wipes all the time. Those are everyday injuries that we're okay with. Now, what you won't see in there is a power saw. That would be a catastrophic injury. Big difference. So not all injuries are created equal. The man who founded the first tinkering school in California, his name is Gaver Tully, and this is what he says about, he says, while there are aspects of danger in virtually everything we do, the trick is to learn how mastery actually minimizes danger. So someday, if your kids move out of the house, right, that would be great, and they're going to maybe need to use a hammer, it'd be nice if they had some experience earlier on, maybe in a safer environment, and kind of learn to master the tool. Okay, so moving on to Brookfield Zoo and nature play, I was fortunate enough to be able to collaborate with an author named David Sobel, and he studied childhood for 30 years on 3 continents. So similar to what I was saying before, he found that children, no matter where they are, want to build forts, climb trees, create adventures, collect things, make paths, find shortcuts. These are the simple things that come naturally to children that require Band-Aids. But this is his real point and why I appreciate him so much. He makes this point. What do we do today? We keep children safe inside, right? Removed from all of those opportunities to explore in the ways I just described. However, we are also telling them about elephant poaching and rainforest destruction, which can be completely overwhelming and damage their sense of hope for the future. So when you think about how to be protective of a child, what makes more sense? And he has coined this term called ecophobia, which is the fear of nature that children can get when their primary contact with the natural world is hearing doom and gloom about the environment. And that is the piece that I wrote about in Newsweek. So in your bulletin, you have the essay, and at the bottom, you can link to my website if you'd like to. It's brand new. It's been like up a week. And you can link to that article. And the title, as Katie mentioned, it's called Save the Elephants, Don't Buy Ivory Soap, because that is the slogan that an 8-year-old girl put on a poster when she learned about elephant poaching in 2nd grade. So that essay kind of talks about the disconnect of the messages we give and what children are really ready for and able to handle and understand. So I would love it if you would look that up, but that is another topic for another day. I have a very quiet baby up in the balcony. Okay, so what I'm going to kind of wrap up with today is we're going to look at, I know that some of you, I know Mike is aware of Lenore Ganassi. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and link to her myself in a bit. So Lenore Ganassi was a columnist for the New York Times, and one day, a few years ago, she wrote about an experience she had with her son. Here's the incident in her own words. In 2008, I let my then 9-year-old ride the subway by himself. He'd been asking my husband and me to please take him someplace and let him find his way home. We discussed it. We knew he knew how to read a map. He spoke the language. And we New Yorkers were on the subway all the time. That's how it came to be that one sunny Sunday after lunch at McDonald's, I took him to Bloomingdale's and left him in the handbag department. I gave him a map, a Metro card, quarters for the phone, and $20 for emergencies. I believed he'd be safe. I believed he could figure out his way, and if he needed to ask someone for directions, which it turns out he did, I believed the person would not think, gee, I was about to go home with my nice new Bloomingdale's shirt, but now I think I'll abduct this adorable child instead. Long story short, he got home about 45 minutes later, ecstatic with independence. I wrote a little column about this adventure, and 2 days later, I was on the Today Show, NPR, MSNBC, and Fox News, defending myself as not being the world's worst mom. The notion was that I had deliberately put my son in harm's way, possibly to prove something, and I was just incredibly lucky that he made it home. One NPR caller asked why I had given my son one day of fun, even though he would probably end up dead by nightfall. I launched my blog that weekend to explain my parenting philosophy. Still Lenore speaking, she says, I love safety. I love helmets, car seats, safety belts. I believe in teaching children how to cross the street. I am a safety geek. But I also believe our kids do not need a security detail every time they leave the house. And our kids are safer than we think and more competent too. They deserve a chance to stretch and grow and do what we did, stay out till the street lights come on. So Lenore is one of my heroes. She was completely shocked by this outcry, but instead of crumbling, she started a movement that week called Free Range Kids. She now has a book by that same name, if you're interested, and she just, I believe January, launched a new TV show called World's Worst Mom. Now, I don't know if you've seen the show The Nanny. Has anybody seen that show? But the format of Lenore's show is she goes in to kind of work with a family for a week. And this family has sort of asked for help. So somebody in the family has recognized that they need help with boundaries and safety and overprotection, underprotection. And she goes in and kind of coaches them and helps both the children and the parents feel comfortable about ways to let that child be more independent. So I haven't seen an episode yet, but I encourage you to take a look. So Lenore is also a strong advocate for children's and parents' rights, and she speaks out against what she calls the criminalization of parenthood. And that's where there's a case right now in Maryland, and if you want to get into that during the Q&A, we could talk about that. So I thought she was a kindred spirit. I remember when all of that happened in 2008. I wanted to submit my essay to her. I don't know her, hadn't met her ever. But within an hour of her receiving my Helipad Parent piece, she responded and said, yes, I want to post it. And it was really great and exciting. So here I am 2 months later, spending the morning with you fine people. So what are the safety issues facing your family? Not all kids can or should ride the subway. Some kids live where it's not safe to go around the block alone. I totally get that. Wouldn't even bother to argue that point, right? But I do believe and would argue that all kids deserve opportunities to feel confident and capable. So if they don't live near a subway or even a park with trees, perhaps they can gain responsibility in another way. Maybe they're in the house learning to use kitchen tools responsibly, whatever it might be. What age-appropriate opportunities do the kids in your lives have to feel that ecstatic independence? That is the goal, right? We want our kids to one day grow up and move on out. Yeah? We mentioned being in charge of homework. Again, if they can't ride the subway, can they choose their own electives? Can they choose their own activities? Are there decisions that they can be in control of? So you get the idea. It's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to safety or even options for independence. But each family can look for opportunities for autonomy that make sense for their situation. Maybe the first step is to sit down with your child and talk about areas where they can be more independent. Your children may surprise you by asking for more responsibility, even more chores. Is that possible? So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks, and I eagerly await your questions. Thank you so much for your time and attention so far. I'll be back.